The Glass Cage. Chapter 1. Shadows in the Velvet. The secret didn't taste like ashes. It tasted like expensive gin, rain-soaked wool, and the cold, metallic tang of adrenaline. Elena stood in her darkened kitchen in Manhattan, the glow of the city's skyline bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling windows like a bruised purple neon light. She was scrubbing her hands. The water was scalding, turning her skin a raw, angry red, but she couldn't stop. She needed to wash away the scent of the bar. She needed to wash away the feeling of him. Her husband, Julian, was in the next room. She could hear the rhythmic clack, clack, clack of his laptop. Julian, the man who provided the glass cage she lived in. A world of high thread count sheets, silent galas, and a marriage that had become as predictable as a Swiss watch. "Elena?" Julian's voice drifted in, sharp and analytical. "You've been in there a long time. Everything okay?" Elena froze. She turned off the faucet, the silence that followed feeling heavier than the noise. "Fine," she called back, her voice steady despite the hammer of her heart. "Just a headache. The rain, I think." She looked down at her wedding ring, a 5-carat diamond that felt like a lead weight. 2 hours ago, she hadn't been a wife in a penthouse. 2 hours ago, she had been a ghost in a dive bar downtown. The evening had started with a fight, the usual kind, one where Julian didn't shout but instead dismantled her feelings with the cold precision of a surgeon. He was too busy for the anniversary dinner, a merger, a once-in-a-career opportunity. "You understand, don't you, Elle?" he'd said, not looking up from his phone. She didn't answer. She had simply walked out, grabbed her trench coat, and vanished into the New York drizzle. She ended up at the Velvet Nocturne, a basement bar in the village that smelled of old wood and forgotten secrets. It was the kind of place where the lighting was so low you could reinvent yourself in the shadows. She sat at the far end of the mahogany bar, ordering a drink she didn't want, just to feel something other than invisible. That's when he appeared. He didn't sit next to her. He sat 2 stools away, leaving a deliberate gap of charged air between them. He didn't look like the men she knew. No tailored suit, no Rolex, no calculated smile. He wore a dark leather jacket and had eyes the color of a stormy Atlantic. "You look like someone who's waiting for a storm to break," he said. His voice was a low, gravelly baritone that vibrated in her chest. Elena didn't turn her head. "Maybe I'm just waiting for the rain to stop." "The rain is honest," he replied, finally looking at her. "It's the only thing in this city that doesn't pretend to be something else." His name was Silas. He didn't ask what she did for a living or where she lived. He asked her what she dreamt about when she couldn't sleep. He asked her if she ever felt like her life was a script she hadn't written. For the first time in 10 years, someone wasn't looking at Elena. They were looking into her. The chemistry was a physical force, a magnetic pull that made the air between them thick and hard to breathe. When his hand accidentally brushed hers as he reached for a napkin, electricity shot up her arm, a violent reminder that she was still alive. "I should go," she whispered, even as she leaned closer. "You should," Silas agreed, his eyes dark and unblinking. "But you won't." He was right. They talked for hours, buried in a corner booth where the candlelight flickered against the peeling wallpaper. He told her he was a photographer, someone who captured the ugly truths of the city. She told him things she hadn't even confessed to her therapist. Then came the moment. The rain had intensified, drumming against the pavement outside. Silas stood up to leave, but he paused, his face inches from hers. "I'm staying at the hotel across the street," he said, his voice a mere shadow of a sound. "Room 412, if you want to see the city through my lens, or if you just want to stop pretending for one night." He left a small, matte black business card on the table. No phone number, just the name Silas and an address. Back in the penthouse, Elena dried her hands, her mind racing. She had gone to the hotel. She had stood outside room 412 for 5 minutes, her hand hovering over the wood. And then, she had turned the handle. The memory of what happened behind that door flashed through her mind like a fever dream. The heat, The desperation, the way Silas had looked at her as if she were the only thing that mattered in a collapsing world. It was more than an affair. It was an awakening. A sudden sound snapped her back to the present. Julian was standing in the kitchen doorway. He wasn't looking at her face. He was looking at the floor. "Elena," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, quiet register. "Where did you say you went tonight?" "Just for a walk, Julian. I told you." Julian walked forward, his footsteps echoing on the marble. He reached down and picked something up from the rug near her feet. It was the matte black business card, the one she thought she had tucked safely into her inner coat pocket. Julian flipped it over in his fingers, his jaw tightening. He looked at the card, then up at Elena, his eyes narrowing with a cold, piercing intelligence. "This fell out of your coat," Julian said, holding the card up. "And Silas is a very interesting name, especially since I just saw this same card in a police file on my desk this morning." Elena felt the blood drain from her face. The room seemed to tilt. "A police file?" she whispered. Julian took a step closer, his shadow looming over her. "Why do you have the contact information for a man suspected of 3 disappearances in the tri-state area, Elena? And why does your coat smell like his hotel?" Chapter 2. The Predator's Lens. The silence in the kitchen was so thick it felt like it could be cut with one of the silver steak knives sitting on the counter. Julian didn't move. He stood there, holding that small black card between 2 fingers, as if it were a piece of contaminated evidence. "I'm waiting, Elena," Julian said. His voice was calm, too calm. It was the voice he used when he was winning a closing argument in court. "How does my wife end up with the personal contact of a person of interest in a missing persons case?" Elena's mind scrambled. Her heart was a trapped bird fluttering against her ribs. She had to lie, but it had to be a lie wrapped in enough truth to be believable. I found it," she stammered, crossing her arms to hide her shaking hands. "At the bar. I went to that place, the Velvet Nocturne, like I told you. Someone must have left it on the table. I picked it up by mistake when I was grabbing my keys. I didn't even look at it." Julian's eyes searched hers. He was a man who lived in the details. He noticed the way a witness's pupil dilated. He noticed the slight tremor in a lip. He stepped closer, the scent of his expensive, sterile cologne, sandalwood and cold steel filling her senses. "By mistake," he repeated. He turned the card over. "It's funny, because the police report says this man, Silas, is a photographer. He specializes in candid shots, usually of women who don't know they're being watched. If you found this on a table, you should be careful, Elle. Men like this, they don't leave things by accident. They leave bait." He dropped the card onto the marble island. It landed with a soft thud. "Go to bed," Julian said, his tone suddenly shifting to a chillingly domestic one. "You look exhausted. I have a long day tomorrow. We'll talk about your walks later." Elena didn't sleep. She lay in their king-sized bed, listening to the muffled sounds of the city 60 floors below. Beside her, Julian breathed with a slow, terrifying regularity. He was like a predator in repose. Was Silas a monster? The man she had shared that electric connection with? Was it all a performance? She remembered his hands. They had been strong, but gentle. She remembered the way he talked about the ugly truths of the city. Was she just another ugly truth he was collecting? But then there was Julian. His jealousy wasn't the passionate kind, it was the possessive kind. He didn't love her. He owned her. He curated her life like a piece of fine art. The thought of Julian looking through police files on his wife's movements made her blood run cold. Was he really protecting her, or was he marking his territory? As soon as the first light of a gray Manhattan morning crept through the curtains, Elena knew she couldn't stay in the apartment. She waited until she heard Julian's shower running, then she dressed quickly in dark jeans and a nondescript sweater. She grabbed the black card from the kitchen island. She needed to know. If Silas was a danger, she needed to hear it from him. Or perhaps she just needed to feel that spark of life again, even if it was the kind of life that burned. The hotel was a stark contrast to her penthouse. It was a boutique place in Chelsea, all exposed brick and dim Edison bulbs. Her heart hammered against her teeth as she rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Room 412. She knocked. It was a soft, hesitant sound. The door opened almost instantly, as if he had been standing right behind it. Silas looked different in the daylight. His hair was messy, and he had the shadow of a beard, but his eyes, those stormy, intense eyes, were exactly as she remembered. "You came back," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a relief. "Who are you?" Elena blurted out, her voice cracking. "My husband says, he says you're in a police file. He says you're dangerous." Silas stared at her for a long moment. Then he stepped back, inviting her in. The room was cluttered with camera equipment, tripods, and hundreds of black and white photos pinned to the walls. "Your husband is Julian Vance," Silas said, closing the door. "I know who he is, and he knows who I am, but not for the reasons he told you." Elena looked around the room. The photos weren't of missing women. They were of the city's elite, politicians, CEOs, judges, all of them caught in moments they thought were private. Deals being made in back alleys, infidelities in the back of town cars. "I'm not a murderer, Elena," Silas said, walking toward her. He was close now, his warmth radiating off him. "I'm a whistleblower. I take pictures of people like your husband, the people who run this city while breaking every rule they pretend to uphold. Julian doesn't want to protect you from me. He wants to stop me from exposing him." Elena felt the world tilting again. Exposing him for what? Silas reached for a folder on his desk and pulled out a single photograph. He handed it to her. Elena's breath caught. It was a photo of Julian. He was in a dark parking garage handing a thick envelope to a man whose face was obscured by a hoodie. But it wasn't the transaction that chilled her. It was the date at the bottom of the photo. It was from last night, during the time Julian claimed he was at the office, during the time Elena was at the bar with Silas. "He's involved in something deep, Elena, something that involves the disappearance of the people he's consulting for. I didn't meet you by accident last night. I've been following him for months, but I didn't expect—" He paused, his hand reaching out to graze her cheek. "I didn't expect you." Elena pulled away, her head spinning. "You used me. You targeted me to get to him." "At first," Silas admitted, his voice dropping to that low, hypnotic register. "But then I talked to you, and I realized you're just as much a prisoner of his as those files are. You're the most beautiful thing in his cage, Elena, and I want to set you free." He moved closer, his lips inches from hers. For a moment, she wanted to believe him. She wanted to believe she was a victim and he was her savior. She leaned in, the danger and the desire blurring into one. But then, her eyes drifted to a camera sitting on a tripod in the corner of the room. The red record light was blinking. She froze. She looked from the camera back to Silas's eyes. "Is this a setup too?" she whispered. Before he could answer, a heavy thud echoed from the hallway. Then, the sound of a keycard swiping in the lock of room 412. The door swung open. It wasn't Julian. It was two men in dark suits, the kind of men who didn't look like police, but carried the authority of people who could make you disappear. "Mr. Silas," one of them said, his hand moving inside his jacket. "Mr. Vance would like his property back." Silas grabbed Elena's arm, pulling her toward the small balcony that overlooked the fire escape. "Run!" he hissed. But as Elena scrambled onto the metal grating of the fire escape, she looked down at the street below. Parked directly across the road was Julian's black sedan. The window rolled down just an inch, and she saw the flash of a camera lens from the back seat. Her husband wasn't just jealous. He was documenting every second of her betrayal. Chapter 3. The Descent into the Gray. The iron of the fire escape was a jagged, frozen ladder against the brick of the Chelsea hotel. Elena's fingers were numb, her breath coming in short, ragged plumes of white that vanished into the gray morning mist. Below her, the city was a beast waking up, the roar of yellow cabs, the hiss of buses, and the distant, rhythmic thud of a jackhammer. Beside her, Silas moved with a frantic, practiced agility. He didn't look back at the room they had just fled, but Elena couldn't help it. She looked up through the metal grating. The two men in suits were leaning out the window, their faces devoid of emotion, like statues carved from cold New York granite. One of them held a radio to his lips. They weren't jumping after them. They didn't need to. They were the shepherds, and she and Silas were the sheep being driven exactly where Julian wanted them. "Don't look up, Elena," Silas hissed, his hand gripping her shoulder as they reached the final landing. "Look at me. Only at me." They dropped the last 6 feet into a trash-strewn alleyway. The smell of rotting paper and damp concrete filled her lungs. Silas didn't hesitate. He grabbed her hand, his grip crushing and desperate, and pulled her toward the street. "My husband!" Elena gasped, her heels clicking uselessly against the wet pavement. "He's there, in the car. He saw us." "He didn't just see you," Silas said, his eyes scanning the traffic with a predatory intensity. "He's documenting the unstable wife narrative, the cheating spouse who ran off with a suspected criminal. If he captures enough of this on camera, you don't just lose the marriage, Elena, you lose your life, legally, socially, maybe even literally." They burst out of the alley onto 7th Avenue. Across the street, the black sedan sat idling like a shark in shallow water. The tinted window was still cracked an inch. Elena felt the phantom weight of Julian's gaze behind that glass, cold, calculating, and entirely without mercy. They lost the car in the labyrinth of the West Village, ducking into a subway entrance just as a train was pulling in. The screech of the brakes on the tracks was a scream that echoed Elena's internal state. They sat in the corner of a near-empty car, the flickering fluorescent lights making Silas look like a ghost. "Where are we going?" Elena asked. She felt hollow. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a cold, crushing reality. She was a fugitive from a life she had hated, but at least that life had been safe. Or so she thought. "To a place where Julian's reach is a little shorter," Silas replied. He was clutching his camera bag to his chest as if it were a child. "I have the drive, Elena. The photos I showed you, they're just the surface. Your husband isn't just a lawyer for the elite. He runs a collection service. They call it the Vault." Elena flinched at the name. The Vault. "It's a digital and physical archive of every sin committed by the most powerful people in this city," Silas whispered, leaning in so close she could smell the bitter coffee on his breath. "Blackmail is the currency of New York, and Julian is the bank. That photo of him in the garage, he wasn't just meeting a client, he was receiving deposits. But he got sloppy. He started keeping things for himself, and that makes him a liability to the people he works for." "And what am I?" Elena whispered, a tear finally escaping and tracing a hot path down her cold cheek. "A deposit? Or a liability?" Silas reached out, his thumb catching the tear. His touch was warm, a sharp contrast to everything else. "To him, you're the only thing he can't fully control, and that's why he's obsessed with you. He doesn't love you, Elena. He wants to curate you, to keep you in that penthouse like a trophy that proves he can own even the most beautiful, broken things." They emerged from the subway in a quieter part of Brooklyn, near the industrial docks of Red Hook. The wind here was sharper, carrying the salt and oil of the harbor. Silas led her to a nondescript warehouse, its windows boarded up with plywood. He tapped a code into a rusted keypad, and a small, heavy door creaked open. Inside, it was a tech lover's nightmare. Servers hummed in the shadows, blue and red lights blinking like malevolent eyes. "Stay here," Silas commanded, moving toward a bank of monitors. "I need to upload this drive to a dead man's switch. If anything happens to us, the contents of Julian's vault go to every major news outlet in the country." Elena sat on a crate, her body trembling. She looked at her phone. She had 17 missed calls, all from Julian. No texts, no threats, just the silent, persistent ringing of a man who knew she would eventually have to answer. Then, her phone vibrated again. A message finally popped up. Not a text, but an image. It was a photo of her, taken through the warehouse window she was sitting next to right now. She was seen in profile, looking exhausted and broken. And in the reflection of the glass, she could see the silhouette of a man holding a long-range lens. But it wasn't Julian. She looked at the sender's ID. It was an unknown number. Below the photo was a single line of text. "Silas isn't saving you, Elena. He's just the one who opened the door for the wolves. Look in the bag." Elena's heart stopped. Silas was busy at the computers, his back turned to her. Slowly, her hands shaking, she reached for Silas's camera bag, the one he had been guarding so fiercely. She unzipped the side pocket. Inside, nestled beneath a lens cap, was a stack of legal documents. She pulled them out. They were divorce papers, already signed by Julian. But it was the date on the signature that made the room spin. Julian had signed them 6 months ago, and attached to the back was a life insurance policy in Elena's name for $10 million. The beneficiary wasn't Julian. The beneficiary was Silas. Elena looked up. Silas was no longer typing. He was standing perfectly still, watching her reflection in the dark computer screen. He turned around slowly, a strange, sad smile playing on his lips. "You weren't supposed to look in the bag yet, Elena," he said softly. Outside, the heavy thud of car doors closing echoed through the quiet street. Chapter 4. The Beneficiary of Grief. The hum of the servers in the warehouse suddenly felt like a swarm of hornets inside Elena's skull. She looked at the life insurance policy in her hand, the ink of Silas's name looking like a fresh wound on the paper. $10 million. That was the price of her life. Silas didn't move. He stood silhouetted against the blue glow of the monitors, his face half lost in shadow. The man who had touched her with such apparent tenderness only hours ago now looked like a stranger, a hunter who had finally cornered his prey. "How?" Elena whispered, her voice trembling. "How can you be the beneficiary? You told me you didn't even know who I was until last night. You told me you were following Julian." Silas took a slow step toward her. He didn't look like he was going to attack. He looked like he was mourning. "The truth is a complicated thing in this city, Elena. It's rarely a straight line. It's more like a web." "Is it a lie?" she screamed, throwing the documents at his feet. "Are you working for him? Was the bar a setup? Was the hotel room just a scene in a movie you were directing for him?" The heavy warehouse door groaned on its hinges. The sound of footsteps, slow, measured, and agonizingly familiar, echoed through the hollow space. "Not for me, Elena," a voice rang out from the darkness of the entrance. "For us." Julian stepped into the light. He looked immaculate, his charcoal suit unwrinkled despite the humidity of the docks. He wasn't carrying a weapon. He was carrying a leather briefcase, his expression one of bored disappointment. He walked up to Silas and, without a word, handed him a thick, cream-colored envelope. Silas took it. He didn't look Julian in the eye, but he didn't look away either. "You did well, Silas," Julian said smoothly. "The photos are perfect. The geolocation data from the hotel is logged. The betrayal is complete." Elena felt the floor falling away. She leaned against a metal rack of servers, the cold vibrations rattling her bones. "Julian? What is this?" Julian turned to her, his smile thin and cold. "This, my dear, is an exit strategy. You see, divorcing the wife of a man in my position is expensive, public, messy, but a wife who suffers a mental breakdown, begins an affair with a known criminal, and then tragically disappears. That is a narrative the world accepts, especially when that criminal is the one who loses her." He gestured to Silas. "Silas isn't a whistleblower, Elena. He's a specialist. He finds the cracks in people's lives and he pries them open. I hired him 6 months ago to find a way to make you want to leave. But you were so loyal, so boringly, painfully loyal, we had to create a reason for you to run." "The insurance," Elena choked out. "A little gift for Silas's services," Julian said. "Once you're gone, the policy pays out. Silas gets his fee, I get my freedom and my reputation intact, and the vault stays closed. Everyone wins." "Except me," Elena said, her voice rising with a sudden sharp clarity. "I'm the one who dies." Silas finally spoke, his voice cracked. It wasn't supposed to be like this, Elena. The plan was, you were just supposed to run away, to vanish. I was going to help you get out of the country. The policy was just the way to fund your new life. Julian laughed, a short, dry sound. Is that what you told her, Silas? How romantic. But we both know the documents you signed in that envelope don't lead to a beach in Mexico. They lead to a very deep, very cold part of the East River. Silas's hand tightened on the envelope. He looked at Elena, and for a second, she saw a flicker of the man from the bar. The man who said the rain was the only honest thing in the city. I changed the plan, Silas whispered, looking at Julian. I'm not doing it. Julian's face didn't change, but his eyes turned into chips of ice. You've already done it, Silas. The police are on their way. I called them 5 minutes ago. I reported a kidnapping. My wife, taken at gunpoint from our home by a man matching your description. When they find you here, with her, and my fixers outside testify that you were acting erratically... He stepped closer to Silas, his voice dropping to a hiss. You're a felon, Silas. I'm a pillar of the community. Who do you think they're going to shoot first when they storm this building? In the distance, the first faint wail of sirens began to cut through the Red Hook fog. Elena looked between the two men. Her husband, the architect of her destruction, and her lover, the man who had been paid to destroy her but claimed to have grown a conscience. Suddenly, the red record light on the camera Silas had set up earlier caught her eye. It was still blinking. It had been recording the entire conversation. She lunged for the camera. No! Julian shouted, losing his composure for the first time. He moved faster than Elena expected, grabbing her by the hair and slamming her back against the server rack. The pain was blinding. She felt the metallic taste of blood in her mouth. Silas roared and tackled Julian, the two men crashing into a desk, sending monitors shattering to the floor. Elena scrambled for the camera, her fingers slipping on the broken glass. She grabbed it, clutching the small device to her chest. The sirens were louder now, reflecting off the metal warehouses closing in from all sides. She looked at the exit, then at the two men fighting on the floor. Silas had Julian pinned, but Julian was reaching for something in his waistband, a small silver derringer. Silas, look out! Elena screamed. A shot rang out. The sound was deafening in the enclosed space. Silence followed. Only the hum of the servers and the approaching sirens remained. Elena stood by the back door, the camera in her hand, watching as one of the men slumped forward, a dark stain spreading across the white shirt of the other. She didn't wait to see who it was. She pushed open the heavy door and vanished into the fog of the docks just as the first blue and red lights began to dance against the warehouse walls. But as she ran, she realized something that made her heart stop. The camera was light, too light. She flipped open the battery compartment. It was empty. There was no SD card, no recording. She turned around and saw a figure standing in the shadows of an adjacent building, watching her. A figure holding a small, glowing memory card between two fingers. It was the man in the hoodie from Julian's photograph, the one from the parking garage. He didn't move. He just pointed toward the water, where a small boat was idling in the dark. Chapter 5. The Black Water. The fog over the East River was like a shroud, thick enough to swallow the screams of the city. Elena's lungs burned, each breath a mixture of salt, diesel, and the metallic tang of fear. Behind her, the warehouse was a fading silhouette of red and blue sirens. Ahead of her, the dark water of the harbor lapped against the rotting wood of the pier with a sound like a heartbeat. She stared at the man in the hoodie. He stood on the edge of the dock, silhouetted against the dim lights of a small, idling pilot boat. He was the ghost from the photograph, the man who had been exchanging envelopes with Julian in a dark garage. "Who are you?" Elena whispered, her voice barely audible over the low rumble of the boat's engine. "What do you want?" The man didn't speak. He simply held up the small black SD card, the one that contained the recording of Julian and Silas's confession. He tossed it. Elena caught it in a desperate reflex, the plastic sharp against her palm. "Get on the boat, Elena," the man said. His voice wasn't a threat. It was a warning. It was hollow, exhausted, and strangely familiar. "Why should I trust you?" she asked, backing away toward the edge of the pier. "You work for Julian. I saw you." The man pulled back his hood. In the flickering light of a nearby street lamp, Elena saw a face that looked like it had been carved out of shadow. He had a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw, and his eyes were weary. The eyes of a man who had seen too many ugly truths. "I don't work for Julian," he said. "I was the vault. I was the one who built it. I was the one who collected the secrets. And when I got too good at it, Julian tried to have me erased. He thinks I'm at the bottom of the Hudson. He doesn't know I've been watching him for 2 years, waiting for him to make a mistake." He pointed to the SD card in her hand. "That card isn't just his confession about you. It's the encryption key to everything he's ever hidden. He didn't just want to kill you for the insurance, Elena. He wanted to kill you because you were starting to remember things he'd whispered in his sleep. Things about the men who really run this city." The boat moved silently through the water, cutting through the wake of a distant ferry. Elena sat in the small, cramped cabin, her hands wrapped around a lukewarm thermos of coffee the man, Marcus, had given her. "Where are you taking me?" she asked. "To the only place Julian can't reach," Marcus said, his eyes fixed on the dark horizon. "But first, you need to look at what's on that card. Not just the video from tonight, the hidden files." Marcus reached over and plugged the SD card into a rugged laptop on the dash. He typed a series of commands, and the screen flooded with documents. Elena's breath hitched. She saw her own name. Thousands of entries under her name. "What is this?" she whispered. "It's your life, Elena. Every phone call, every text, every location you've visited for the last 5 years," Marcus said. "Julian wasn't just curating you. He was studying you. He was looking for a pattern. He needed to know exactly when and where you would break." Elena scrolled through the files. She saw photos of herself she didn't remember being taken. She saw transcripts of her conversations with her mother, her doctor, even her childhood friends. But then she found a folder titled Phase 6. She opened it. Inside were blueprints of their penthouse. But they weren't the blueprints she knew. They showed hidden compartments, microphones in the walls, and a secret room she had never seen. A room located behind the library she spent every afternoon in. And then she saw the date of Phase 6. It was set for tomorrow. "He wasn't going to wait for Silas to kill you," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a whisper. "The plan with Silas was just a distraction, a way to get you out of the apartment so he could set the stage. Tomorrow was the day you were supposed to commit suicide in that penthouse. Silas was just the scapegoat he was going to blame for driving you to it." Elena felt a cold, sharp anger beginning to replace her fear. It was a slow burn, starting in her gut and spreading through her veins like ice. She had been a puppet in a play she didn't even know was being performed. "The shot!" Elena said suddenly, remembering the warehouse. "Who was hit? Was it Silas or Julian?" Marcus didn't answer for a moment. He turned the boat toward the Statue of Liberty, the giant copper figure looking like a silent judge in the mist. "Does it matter?" Marcus asked. "If Julian is alive, he's coming for you. If Silas is alive, he's looking for his payout. In this game, there are no heroes, Elena, only survivors." The boat slowed as they approached a secluded pier in Staten Island, far from the prying eyes of Manhattan. The silence here was eerie, broken only by the cry of a lone seagull. Marcus turned the engine off. The boat drifted toward the dock. "There's a car waiting at the end of the pier," Marcus said, handing her a burner phone and a thick envelope of cash. "Go to the address in the GPS. Stay there, don't call anyone, don't look back." "Why are you helping me?" Elena asked, standing up. Marcus looked at her, and for the first time she saw a flicker of something human in his eyes. "Because I'm the one who helped him build your cage. Consider this my resignation." Elena stepped onto the pier. She felt the weight of the SD card in her pocket, the key to Julian's empire, the key to her freedom, or perhaps the key to her own grave. She began to walk toward the dark silhouette of the car. But as she reached the halfway point, her burner phone vibrated. She pulled it out, a single text message from an unknown number. "Check the trunk, Elena. I left you a wedding present." She froze. The voice in her head screamed to run, but her hand was already reaching for the latch of the car's trunk. She popped it open. The light from the trunk illuminated the contents. It wasn't money. It wasn't a weapon. It was Silas. He was bound and gagged, his eyes wide with terror, his chest heaving. But he wasn't looking at her. He was looking at something behind her. Elena turned around. Standing at the end of the pier, leaning against a wooden piling with a cigarette in his hand, was Julian. He was bleeding from a graze on his temple, his suit jacket gone, his shirt sleeves rolled up. He looked more alive, more dangerous than she had ever seen him. "You really should have stayed on the boat, Elle," Julian said, the smoke from his cigarette curling into the fog. "But I knew you couldn't resist a secret. It's your best and worst quality." He held up a remote detonator. "Now," Julian said, his voice as smooth as silk, "let's talk about that SD card before this pier becomes part of the Atlantic." Chapter 6. The Shattered Frame. The fog was no longer a shroud. It was a witness. Elena stood on the edge of the rotting pier, the wind whipping her hair across her face like tiny lashings. In front of her was the trunk of the car where Silas lay bound, his muffled pleas vibrating against the metal. 10 feet away stood Julian, the man she had shared a bed with for a decade, the man who had turned her life into a curated museum of misery. The red light on the detonator in Julian's hand glowed like the eye of a demon. "You always did have a flair for the dramatic, Elle," Julian said, taking a slow, rhythmic drag from his cigarette. The bruise on his temple had turned a sickly shade of plum. "But we're past the point of theater. Give me the card, now." "Why, Julian?" Elena asked, her voice surprisingly steady. "Is the vault so fragile that one little memory card can bring it all down? Or is it that you're afraid of what's in the Phase 6 folder, the part where you kill me?" Julian's eyes narrowed. "I didn't want to kill you. I wanted to perfect you. But you became unpredictable. You started looking for exits. And in my world, there are no exits. Only transitions." "You're a monster," she whispered. "I'm a realist," Julian countered, stepping closer. "The world is built on leverage. I didn't create the rules, I just mastered them. Now, the card. If you drop it into the water, I press this button, the car goes, Silas goes, and you spend the rest of your life in a prison cell for the murder of your lover. I've already planted the prints, Elena. The narrative is set." Elena looked down at the small black card in her hand. It felt light, yet it contained the weight of 1,000 ruined lives. She looked at the car, where Silas was staring at her, his eyes wide with a terrifying realization. She realized then that Silas hadn't been looking at Julian. He had been looking at the boat. Marcus was gone. The pilot boat was drifting away into the mist, its engines silent. But as Elena looked closer, she saw a faint blue light pulsing from the boat's mast. A transmitter. "The dead man's switch," Elena whispered to herself. "What was that?" Julian barked, his finger hovering over the detonator. Elena looked back at her husband and smiled. It wasn't a smile of joy. It was the smile of someone who had just stepped out of a burning building. "You're right, Julian. The world is built on leverage," Elena said. She held the card up, but she didn't threaten to drop it. Instead, she squeezed it. She felt the plastic snap and splinter between her fingers. Julian froze. "What are you doing?" "I don't need the card, Julian. Marcus didn't help me to save me. He helped me because I was the only person who could get close enough to you to trigger the final upload." She held up the burner phone Marcus had given her. The screen was glowing with a progress bar. 99%, 100%. Upload complete. "The moment I opened the trunk, the proximity sensor on this phone triggered the boat's transmitter," Elena said, her voice rising over the sound of the wind. "The vault isn't a secret anymore. It's on the cloud. It's being sent to the FBI, the New York Times, and every one of your clients who you've been blackmailing for years." Julian's face went pale. a ghostly, translucent white. You're lying. Check your own phone, Julian. I'm sure your clients are already starting to get the notifications. Julian scrambled for his pocket, his composure finally shattering. He pulled out his phone, and even from where she was standing, Elena could see the screen lighting up with a barrage of calls. His empire wasn't just falling, it was vaporizing. In that moment of distraction, Elena lunged. She didn't go for Julian, she went for the trunk. She slammed the latch shut and threw herself over the back of the car, just as Julian let out a primal scream of rage. "I'll kill you!" he roared, lunging toward her, the detonator gripped tight. But Julian never reached her. From the darkness of the fog, 3 black SUVs roared onto the pier, their headlights blinding. Men in tactical gear swarmed out, weapons drawn. "Federal agents, drop the device! Get on the ground!" Julian stood paralyzed, the detonator in one hand, his phone in the other. He looked at the agents, then at Elena, who was huddled against the cold metal of the car. For a split second, he looked like he was going to press the button anyway, to take her with him into the abyss. But Julian Vance was, above all else, a man who feared the dark. And the dark was finally closing in. He dropped the detonator. It clattered onto the wooden planks, harmless. He was tackled to the ground, his face pressed into the salt-stained wood he had stood so proudly upon moments before. 2 months later. The city looked different from the street level. Elena sat in a small, crowded coffee shop in Brooklyn, not a boutique hotel or a luxury penthouse, but a place that smelled of burnt beans and real life. She wore a simple coat and no jewelry. The 5-carat diamond was at the bottom of the East River. She picked up the morning paper. The headline was still dominated by the vault scandals. Dozens of high-ranking officials had resigned. Julian was in a federal holding cell, facing a litany of charges that would ensure he never saw the sun from a window higher than the ground floor again. Silas had disappeared. He had been released after testifying against Julian, vanished into the gray folds of the city he claimed to photograph so well. Sometimes Elena thought she saw a man with a camera watching her from across a street, but she never looked twice. She didn't want to be a subject anymore. A man sat down at the table across from her. He kept his hood up. "You're hard to find," Marcus said, sliding a small envelope across the table. "That was the point," Elena replied. She didn't open the envelope. "Is it over?" "The vault is gone, but secrets have a way of growing back like weeds," Marcus said, standing up to leave. "However, your Phase 6 file. I deleted the master copy. You're the only one who knows who you were. Now you get to decide who you are." Elena watched him walk out into the rain. She looked at her reflection in the window of the coffee shop. For the first time in 10 years, she didn't see a trophy. She didn't see a prisoner. She saw a woman who had walked through fire and come out with her own soul. She stood up, left the envelope of money on the table for the waitress, and walked out into the New York drizzle. She didn't have a plan. She didn't have a script. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't afraid of the storm. The end.